Ava had always believed in the idea of true love, the kind that stood the test of time, supported through thick and thin, and was built on mutual understanding. For 7 years, she poured her heart into her relationship with Julian, thinking that their bond would naturally lead to marriage. After all, 7 years together should have been enough, right? But with every passing year, something crucial was missing: commitment. Ava had asked Julian, multiple times, about their future. When would they get married? Her questions were met with vague responses. Julian would shrug it off, saying things like, "Let's just let things take their natural course," or "Marriage isn't everything." Each time, Ava's heart sank a little deeper. What was she waiting for? She wanted the future, a future where they could share everything: home, family, dreams. But Julian seemed too content in the present, unable or unwilling to take the next step. The more she asked, the more he pulled away. And yet, Ava couldn't walk away. She loved him. She had invested years in this relationship, and a part of her refused to believe that it would never be enough. She had hoped that maybe, just maybe, he was waiting for the right time. But as the months turned into years, the cracks in their relationship became more noticeable. Julian was always too busy to talk about their future, but when something was important to him, like his promotion, Ava was left in the shadows. On the night of Julian's promotion, he booked the top floor of the Grand Court Hotel. Ava had no idea he had been promoted. She wasn't invited. He didn't even mention it to her, choosing instead to celebrate with his colleagues and friends. Meanwhile, her birthday had gone by with no special acknowledgement. Julian's gift was always late, a simple "sorry I've been busy," accompanied by a rushed, generic present. Ava couldn't ignore it anymore. The years had stacked up, and with each passing year, she found herself giving more, while Julian seemed to take her for granted. It was on that night, when she saw the celebration photos from the hotel, Julian laughing with his first love, surrounded by his friends, that Ava knew, deep down, that things would never change. The realization hit her like a cold wave. She wasn't a priority in his life. She was just there, always waiting, always giving. That night, with the weight of years of uncertainty pressing down on her chest, Ava made a decision. She couldn't keep waiting for a man who didn't see her as his equal partner. Her dreams were bigger than Julian's excuses. She deserved more. The idea of waiting any longer seemed pointless. Ava stood up, wiped her tears, and with a trembling voice, told Julian she was done. She was ready to move on, even if it meant facing the uncertainty of the future alone. Her heart still hurt, but she knew, deep down, that she couldn't settle for a love that only existed in her imagination. It was time to love herself first. The night Ava made the decision to walk away from Julian, her heart felt like it was breaking and healing all at once. She thought back to all the years they had shared, to the love she thought would grow deeper with time. But it hadn't. Not in the way she had imagined. For years, Ava had done everything in her power to make their relationship work. She supported Julian during his tough times, celebrated his wins, and stood by him when the world seemed to turn its back. Yet, with each passing year, it became painfully clear that Julian was emotionally absent. He was present in body, but never in spirit. Ava could no longer ignore the quiet resentment that had started to build in her heart. He was the man she had built a life with, yet he never seemed to consider her feelings. He was always too busy to talk about their future, while making grand gestures for his colleagues and friends. His promotions were celebrated with lavish dinners, but her birthday? Barely a mention. No flowers. No special dinner. No meaningful conversation. It was always "I've been busy," as if that excuse could wash away the growing distance between them. The more Ava tried to discuss the future, the more Julian would brush her off. She asked him about marriage again, the third time, hoping that this time things might be different. But Julian just shrugged it off, as though it wasn't important. "Let's just let things take their natural course," he said, his voice casual. Ava's heart sank a little further each time. How could he not see the importance of this? How could he not see her need for security, for a commitment that would solidify what they had built? The last straw came on the night of Julian's promotion. He celebrated with his first love, Olivia, without a thought to what Ava might feel. He didn't even mention his promotion to her, much less celebrate it together. Yet, Olivia was there, the woman from his past, and Julian was more than happy to toast to her birthday at the Grand Court Hotel. In that moment, Ava realized the cruel truth: Julian wasn't neglecting her because he was busy, he was neglecting her because he didn't prioritize her. Ava stood there, watching the photos pop up on social media, with Julian and Olivia laughing together, and she felt a pang deep in her chest. This wasn't the man she had given her heart to. He wasn't the man who would fight for her. He was the man who made excuses, who prioritized his past over their future, who made her feel like an afterthought in a story she had thought was written in love. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how much she had given and how little she had received in return. Julian's friends mocked her, dismissing her desire for commitment as something trivial. They saw her as the woman who would always be there, waiting. And maybe, in a way, she had become that person. But not anymore. Ava was done waiting for Julian. She was done living in a relationship where she had to beg for the love and commitment she deserved. She was ready to move on. The pain was still there, but it was no longer an anchor. It was a lesson. And it was time for her to learn how to love herself first. This time, Ava was going to put her own happiness first. For Ava, the decision to leave Julian wasn't made overnight. It was the culmination of years of feeling invisible, of loving someone who could never truly love her back the way she needed. But that night, standing in front of Julian, she felt something shift inside her. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, she could finally see things clearly. She wasn't just walking away from a man, she was walking toward a future she deserved. The weight of his indifference was overwhelming. Every conversation about their future ended in disappointment, every attempt to connect with him left her feeling more isolated. Ava had tried, time and time again, to get Julian to see the importance of their relationship, of their future. But his response was always the same, a nonchalant excuse about being busy or distracted by work. He could never see the urgency in her desire for a commitment, for a sense of security, for a shared vision of a life together. And then, that night, after learning that Julian had celebrated his promotion in private with Olivia, Ava felt a deep and painful realization. Julian had not just been emotionally distant, he had been emotionally unavailable because his heart was elsewhere. He had never been fully invested in their relationship, at least not in the way Ava had hoped. She wasn't a priority to him. She never had been. The realization cut deeper than anything she had felt before. She remembered how he would tell her he was too busy to celebrate her birthday. It was always something: work, friends, obligations, but never her. Ava had given so much to him over the years. Her love, her patience, her understanding. She had overlooked his emotional neglect for far too long, hoping one day he would see her, would recognize the woman she was and the love she had to offer. But that day never came. As the truth settled in, Ava realized that the years she had spent waiting for him to change had been wasted. She wasn't waiting for him to love her, she was waiting for him to wake up and see what was right in front of him. But that wasn't her job. She wasn't there to convince him. It was time for her to choose herself, to love herself enough to walk away. The breaking point came when, after that night, Julian said the words that finally pierced through her heart. He dismissed her feelings with a few harsh words in front of his friends. "Ava, your persistent questioning really makes you look cheap." The judgment in his tone, the way he belittled her in front of others, it was the final straw. Julian had made her feel small for far too long, and now, it was her turn to stand tall. With every ounce of dignity she could muster, Ava stood up in front of Julian and his friends and walked away. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had already realized that the love she had so desperately sought from him was never going to be returned. It was time to love herself and embrace the future that awaited her, even if it meant walking away from everything she thought she knew about love. The pain was sharp, but it was also liberating. Ava had finally taken control of her own story. In the days following her decision to walk away from Julian, Ava found herself in a strange limbo. It wasn't the relief she expected, but instead a complex blend of sadness, anger, and, oddly enough, a growing sense of clarity. She had spent so long in a relationship where she gave her all to someone who couldn't even meet her halfway. But in walking away, Ava realized something vital about herself: she deserved more. The nights were the hardest, when loneliness crept in and the silence of her apartment felt suffocating. She missed the comfort of familiarity, the way Julian would always be there, even if he never truly showed up emotionally. She had spent so many years waiting for him to change, to become the man she needed him to be, but it was all just a fantasy. The truth hit her harder than she expected: she had never been enough for him. But more importantly, he had never been enough for her either. It wasn't easy to admit that the love she had been chasing was never reciprocated in the way she had imagined. But with each passing day, the pain began to fade, replaced by an unfamiliar sense of independence. Ava spent more time reflecting on the moments when she had been ignored, belittled, or dismissed. She started to see the pattern, the subtle ways Julian had made her feel invisible. And as painful as it was to acknowledge, it was also empowering. She had been so wrapped up in his neglect, in trying to fix something that was beyond repair, that she had forgotten to look inward. She had forgotten to see her own worth. One afternoon, as Ava was walking through the park, she ran into a colleague she hadn't seen in years. They exchanged pleasantries, and the conversation naturally turned to the topic of relationships. Ava found herself speaking openly about Julian, the ups and downs, the love that she thought was real. The colleague listened intently before offering a simple but powerful observation: "Ava, you deserve someone who shows up for you, not just when it's convenient, but all the time." The words hit her like a bolt of lightning. Why had she never seen that? She had been so caught up in the idea of love, the romanticized version in her head, that she hadn't stopped to think about what it truly meant to be loved. Love wasn't just about grand gestures or empty promises. It was about mutual respect, emotional support, and shared values. As Ava walked home that day, she realized how much of herself she had sacrificed for Julian's indifference. She had allowed herself to be defined by his actions, by his lack of commitment. But now, she was done. It wasn't about him anymore, it was about her. She deserved someone who would love her, not because they were obligated to, but because they genuinely wanted to. It was in this moment of self-realization that Ava finally felt the power of letting go. She had spent so long waiting for Julian to give her the love she had always dreamed of, but now she understood that she had the power to give herself the love she deserved. Ava's heart still ached, but it wasn't the same kind of ache. It wasn't the ache of longing for someone who couldn't love her back. It was the ache of letting go of the person she thought she could never live without. And in that space, she found something she hadn't expected: freedom. The journey to healing wasn't going to be easy. But Ava knew one thing for sure: she was finally ready to love herself first. And that, she realized, was the beginning of a much more beautiful love story. In the months that followed Ava's decision to leave Julian, she found herself in a place she had never anticipated: alone, but strangely empowered. It wasn't that she was without the weight of sadness or regret, but there was something different in the air. A new chapter was unfolding in her life, one that didn't revolve around Julian, or the love that had once consumed her. Ava had always believed that love came from others, that someone had to choose you, make you feel seen, heard, and loved in order for you to feel whole. But as she reflected on her years with Julian, she realized the truth that had been hiding in plain sight. She had been whole all along. She had just forgotten. She had given Julian so much of herself that she had lost sight of her own needs and desires. Now, in this newfound space of freedom, she began to rediscover the woman she had put on hold. It was a slow and often painful process. There were days when the loneliness crept in, and she'd find herself staring at the empty seat across from her at dinner, wishing for the familiar face of Julian to be there. But those moments were fewer and farther between. As time passed, Ava began to understand that her self-worth wasn't tied to the affection of a man who couldn't even show up for her. She had loved herself in the wrong way, by waiting for someone else to validate her. One evening, while reading a book in her cozy apartment, Ava was struck by the realization that she was no longer holding onto the past. She wasn't chasing after Julian's attention anymore, nor was she waiting for him to realize what he had lost. She had let go of the idea of what could have been and embraced the idea of what could be. There was so much more to life than the man she had spent 7 years of her life with. She was learning how to be happy on her own terms, to find joy in the small things, like cooking a meal just for herself, taking long walks in the park, or spending hours at the bookstore without worrying about anyone else's needs but her own. But it wasn't all just about the absence of Julian. It was about the presence of someone else, herself. Ava started doing things she had once put off, traveling to new places, taking up painting, even picking up the guitar again. She started to feel the pulse of life again, not as a backdrop to someone else's world, but as the main character in her own story. For the first time in years, Ava wasn't just existing. She was living. And then, one day, while out for a walk in the park, she met someone unexpected, Gabriel. He was confident, kind, and most importantly, gentle. Gabriel didn't rush to know her past or make promises about the future. He simply was someone who saw her, respected her, and treated her with the love and care she had always hoped for. He didn't need to heal her wounds, because Ava was already doing that on her own. But together, they made something beautiful, a partnership based on mutual respect and understanding. As Gabriel walked alongside Ava, he didn't ask for her past, he embraced who she was in the present. For once, Ava wasn't seeking validation from anyone. She had already learned to love herself. And now, with Gabriel, she was experiencing a love that was not about fixing broken pieces, but about two people bringing their full selves together to build something meaningful. Ava knew that this love wasn't the same as her past relationship with Julian. This time, she wasn't settling. This time, it was real. And it was a love that was only possible because she had first learned to love herself. That was the true beginning of her love story. As the days went on, Ava realized that choosing self-love wasn't a one-time decision, it was a daily commitment. But she knew, without a doubt, that this was the love that would last. And for the first time in her life, she was truly ready to share her heart with someone who would appreciate it. For Ava, it had always been about waiting. Waiting for Julian to finally love her the way she wanted, waiting for the signs that he would give her the commitment she craved. But with Gabriel, something was different. He wasn't asking her to wait for him to change or for some future promise that might never come. Gabriel was steady, consistent, and above all, present. For the first time in her life, Ava felt loved not because of what she could give, but because of who she was. The more she spent time with Gabriel, the more she realized how deep his affection for her truly ran. It wasn't the grand, dramatic gestures that Julian had sometimes offered. It was the quiet moments, the subtle ways Gabriel showed he cared. Like when they'd sit together on the porch with a cup of coffee in the mornings, or when he would show up at her apartment unannounced just to bring her favorite flowers. Gabriel didn't believe in doing things for show. His love wasn't about appearances or fulfilling some idea of romance. It was real. It was about support, understanding, and connection. Ava had never realized how much she had been missing this kind of love. With Julian, there had always been uncertainty. She had been caught in a cycle of unreciprocated affection, never truly feeling seen or understood. Julian's love, if she could even call it that, had always been conditional. He loved her when it suited him, when it was convenient. But when things got difficult, when she needed him most, he was nowhere to be found. With Gabriel, there was no pretension. No need for her to beg for his attention or prove herself worthy of his time. He had shown her, in both big and small ways, that love wasn't something you had to fight for. It was something you built together, brick by brick, day by day. Ava realized that this was what love was supposed to feel like, not a constant struggle, but a partnership built on mutual respect and care. But it wasn't just the little things that Gabriel did that won her over. It was his deep respect for her independence, her dreams, and her history. He never tried to erase her past with Julian. Instead, he accepted it as part of who she was, understanding that her journey had shaped her into the woman she had become. Unlike Julian, Gabriel didn't feel threatened by Ava's strength, or the things she had accomplished on her own. He saw her as an equal, and that was something she had never felt in her past relationships. There was something refreshing about Gabriel's unwavering consistency. Ava no longer had to wonder where she stood with him. She didn't have to guess his feelings or wait for him to make a move. Gabriel was always clear with his intentions, always open about his emotions. He loved her, and he showed her every day in a way that made her believe in love again. As Ava continued to navigate her new relationship with Gabriel, she couldn't help but marvel at how far she had come. She had been through so much heartache with Julian, but now, she was building something beautiful with a man who truly valued her. This time, love wasn't about waiting for someone to change. It was about choosing someone who had already shown up for her. And for the first time in her life, Ava was finally able to breathe easy, knowing that this love was the real thing. It was genuine, it was kind, and it was the love she had always deserved. It had been months since Ava left Julian, and during that time, she had learned how to live for herself. The ache of her past relationship had begun to fade, replaced by the warmth of Gabriel's steady love. But as life continued to move forward, Julian remained a shadow in her past, lingering just out of reach. His absence had been painful, but in many ways it had freed her. However, life had a way of surprising her. One evening, as Ava and Gabriel were enjoying dinner at a local restaurant, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the text, "Ava, I made a mistake. Can we talk?" It was Julian. Ava's first instinct was to ignore it. After all, he had been the one to turn his back on her, to treat her as if she were unimportant. Why should she let him back in now? But as much as she tried to convince herself to delete the message and move on, she couldn't help but feel a small flutter of curiosity. That night, after dinner, she found herself alone in her apartment, staring at her phone. She hadn't heard from Julian in so long. And now, after all the time apart, here he was, reaching out. Was this his regret, his attempt to undo the damage he'd caused? Her fingers hovered over the screen, as the weight of the years they'd spent together hung in the air. Finally, she decided to reply, but only with caution. "What do you want, Julian?" His response came quickly, "I've been thinking about everything. I know I messed up. I took you for granted, and I regret it more than you know. I'm sorry, Ava. Ava sat in silence, the words weighing heavily on her heart. She had loved him once, deeply and completely. But now, all she felt was a bittersweet nostalgia, a memory of the person she had been when she was with him. She thought about the time they had spent apart, about how she had rebuilt her life with Gabriel. The love she had with him wasn't built on waiting or trying to fix something that was broken. It was built on respect, kindness, and the freedom to be herself. Ava realized that Julian's regret wasn't enough to change the reality of their past. His apology was only words, a way to ease his own guilt, to find solace in knowing that he hadn't completely lost her. But it didn't undo the years of emotional neglect, the countless moments of her standing alone, hoping he would finally show up. Ava took a deep breath and typed her response. I appreciate your apology, but it's too late. I've moved on, Julian. I've found someone who values me, someone who shows up for me in ways you never did. I deserve more than empty apologies and broken promises. I hope you can find peace, but I'm done. She pressed send, the finality of her words bringing a sense of calm over her. For so long, she had waited for Julian to love her in the way she deserved, but now she knew that true love wasn't about waiting or hoping someone would change. It was about choosing to move forward, to embrace a love that was real and unwavering. As Ava placed her phone down on the table, she felt a sense of closure. Julian's regret was his to carry, not hers. She had let go of the past, and in doing so, she had opened her heart to a future full of possibilities. In the end, Ava realized that the most powerful thing she had done was choosing herself, and she had no intention of looking back. As the months passed, Ava's life continued to unfold in unexpected and beautiful ways. Gabriel's love for her had not only healed her heart, but it had also shown her what real love could feel like, grounded, patient, and unconditional. It was the kind of love that made her feel safe, understood, and deeply valued. Ava had once believed that love was about grand gestures, about the fireworks and passion that swept you off your feet. But with Gabriel, she realized that true love wasn't about dramatic moments, it was in the small, everyday things. It was in the way he held her hand during long walks, how he remembered the smallest details about her likes and dislikes, or how he would just sit beside her after a long day, without needing to say a word. True love, Ava learned, was built on a foundation of respect, trust, and shared experiences. Gabriel never tried to change her. He loved her for who she was, flaws and all. And for the first time in her life, Ava felt seen, not for the woman she was trying to become, or the version of herself she had thought people wanted, but for the woman she truly was. One quiet afternoon, as they sat in the park watching the sunset, Ava looked at Gabriel and realized just how far she had come. She was no longer waiting for someone to choose her. She had chosen herself, and in doing so, she had created space for someone who saw her value from the start. You know, Gabriel said, breaking the silence, I never thought I'd meet someone like you. Ava smiled softly, her heart full. What do you mean? Someone who's been through so much, yet still carries so much strength. You've come a long way, Ava, he said, his voice filled with admiration. I'm just lucky to be a part of your life. Ava felt her eyes welling up with tears. She hadn't expected the wave of emotions that his words would stir within her. She had spent so many years feeling overlooked and unloved, yet here she was, with a man who loved her in ways she had only dreamed of. I've been through a lot, she replied, wiping away a tear. But it's all made me who I am today. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. I'm not perfect, Gabriel, but I've learned how to love myself. And I'm finally ready to love someone else the right way. Gabriel reached over, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face, and smiled at her with such tenderness that Ava's heart skipped a beat. You don't have to be perfect for me, Ava. You're more than enough, just as you are, he said, his words simple, yet so profound. For the first time in her life, Ava believed him. She wasn't looking for someone to fix her, and she wasn't waiting for validation from anyone. She had found a love that wasn't about proving herself, it was about being enough, just as she was. Ava realized that Julian's absence, the pain of their broken relationship, had cleared the space for her to welcome something even more beautiful into her life. True love wasn't about finding someone who completed you, it was about finding someone who loved you for all that you already were. And in Gabriel, Ava had found that person. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ava leaned her head on Gabriel's shoulder, feeling a peace she had never known before. She was no longer the woman who was searching for love. She had found it in herself, and in Gabriel's steady, unwavering affection. And for the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be.